Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to I Didn't Sign Up for This. Carrie, it's another time, another place. What are we talking about?
Today I want to talk about fear. I think that we've talked a lot about happiness and we've talked a lot about fear in the sense that it can prevent us from achieving the life goals that we have set for ourselves or what we want to do. But I want to dive in a little bit and talk about what fear is, because until we overcome those fears, we're going to have those obstacles. And so I've been thinking a lot about that over the weekend, and I think it's a good topic.
All right. So what do you think fear is?
I looked up the definition of fear, and it's interesting, and I'll tell you why it's interesting, but I'm going to read you the definition first. It's an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. And the one word that stood out to me is belief. So when I was... Oh, gosh, it was 2007. So I got the opportunity to accept a position that required a lot of travel with the telecommunications company that I've worked with forever. And I was definitely afraid of flying. Now, I remember the first time I flew when I was 17, and I wasn't afraid at all. And then I took a couple of other trips, and I remember going to South America and coming back, and everything was fine. That fear wasn't there. But somehow I had developed a fear of flying. And it could have been that a month prior to 9/11, it was actually towards the end of the month. I remember I'd gone back to Hilton Head for my high school reunion. And so we ended up flying about 2 weeks before 9/11 happened. And after 9/11, I didn't fly for years.
Wow.
And so fast forward to 2007, and I decided to apply for this operations position, project management position. And it would require that I travel throughout the Western United States, visiting different business or offices or going to meetings, and mostly California and Seattle, Washington. And so I remember being at my house when I got a call saying that I had been offered the job. And they needed me to fly to Seattle in 2 days for a big face-to-face meeting that they were going to have.
Okay.
And I will tell you that in that moment, I was not going to let my fear of flying, or ultimately the fear of things not going well, up in the air or whatever that looked like, whatever I was imagining, whatever belief I'd put into it, I was not going to let that fear stand in the way of this dream job. And I remember, 2 days later, I'm at Salt Lake City International Airport getting ready to board a flight with other people that worked in the same department to just take a quick flight to Seattle. I was so afraid the entire time that I'm pretty sure the flight was a constant prayer along the lines of, please let us make it. Please let us make it. Please, I promise I'll be better. Please let us land. And I could not understand, and I was okay with that fear. I would even make jokes about it after the fact, and I would never let anybody know until now. Every one of our listeners is going to know this. I have a couple of friends that knew about it, but I would never tell anyone. I would never let them know. So I'm sitting here in an airplane seat, and I have people next to me, and they're talking to me, and I'm smiling and I'm engaging with them. But on the inside, I'm freaking terrified.
Right.
I would gauge how I should feel by the faces of the people on the plane with me, because I was so intensely afraid. And I would think, man, if nobody else is screaming, then I guess I'm good. And it's so funny now. And it seriously took a lot of travel and a lot of years to get over that. Now, my mom was afraid of flying, but I remember being younger and I was like, roller coasters, airplanes, fast cars. I mean, all of these things that I loved, but somehow between that point and 2007 to about 2010 or 2011 is when I kind of went, oh, okay, I'm used to this now.
Right.
I didn't know if it was a lack of control or if it was just being afraid of something potentially happening and not knowing what to do. But I worked very hard to overcome that fear. And it truly took a lot of Xanax and a lot of hypnosis. Like I went to a hypnotherapist to be hypnotized to remove that fear. And I really believe that worked, but that's beside the point. That's my own personal belief.
Sure.
But what it boiled down to is the fact that it was just a belief. It was an unpleasant emotion caused by this belief that I had no control of what was going to happen once I was up there, which in reality is true. But I lived the ultimate scenario every time I boarded a plane, and I traveled quite often. So it took a lot of time to get over that, and it took a lot of motivation on my part. Now, if you step outside of this truly hilarious story, because I think about it now and I'll get on a flight and, I may or may not be able to sleep or I can't read, but I'll watch a movie and I compare where I am now to where I was. So there are two things that I take from that. You have to want your desired result more than the fear that stands in your way. And number two, you have to face your fears head on and you keep boarding that plane.
Right. All right. Well, as always, I have a little take on this.
Okay, I do tell. I'm excited.
Fear is a choice. Now that... Again, remember, I have a secret desire to be hated by everything and everyone. I hate to be the one to break the bad news to you or anybody else. Fear is a choice. You are choosing the fear because of the mismanagement of your own personal thought process. Okay, first of all, you mentioned that the fear was potentially an outgrowth of the notion that once in the air, you have no control. Well, truth be told, you're driving down the road, you have no control. You're controlling your vehicle, but there are thousands, tens of thousands of other cars on the road. And you have no idea what those people are doing or thinking or drinking or anything else, right? And so there's a lack of control there that I'm assuming does not bother you. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So similar lack of control scenario, but the second lack of control scenario is not really a problem. So here's kind of what fear is. Fear is something in your future, long-term or immediate future, that might possibly happen. Now, the fact of the matter is we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what the future holds, and as Aristotle so astutely put, nature abhors a vacuum. So your future is emptiness. The story is out there. The story will be fascinating once it unfolds for you and you experience it. But right here, right now, that story is a vacuum. Now, because nature abhors a vacuum, we are compelled to fill the vacuum with anything and everything that we possibly can. Because people tend to gravitate toward worst possible scenarios as opposed to best possible scenarios, the story of the potential future that is, in fact, a vacuum and cannot be filled until you get there. You project yourself into that future and you fill the empty space with all of the bad things that could happen. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. It's all perspective, right?
It's all subjective. It's all subjective. Right? It's all subjective and it's biochemistry, right? Why do you think the Xanax helps?
Well, it dulls the emotional reaction that's associated with fear.
Close enough, yeah. You're creating certain biochemistry in your brain that is initiating a fight or flight response in you, and you are experiencing that with every cell in your body. Basically because your hypothalamus is cranking out this biochemistry that's telling you you're in immense danger when in fact you're not.
Well, did you know, and this is interesting, and I've known this for a while, but when I was looking into it a little bit, did you know that your brain processes the feeling of fear and excitement the exact same way?
I do know that.
And it's amazing to me. So you can choose to be fearful of not having control of where you're traveling to, or you can turn that into excitement to go where you plan on going. And it's the exact same feeling. You get the same feeling of excitement, or I'm sorry, not the same feeling, but the same physiological response for both of those emotions.
The autonomic nervous system creates the exact same biochemistry, and then you are tasked with interpreting what's going on in your body with your biochemistry. So the hypothalamus creates the same chemistry. The same chemistry is distributed through the autonomic nervous system, and all of your cells stand up and pay attention, right? Mm-hmm. And those cells don't know if you are about to jet into the air down an icy runway or if you're about to crest the top of your favorite roller coaster. The cells don't know. They have no idea. All they know is that the biochemistry is such that you can either be terrified or excited. Now, when jetting down the runway, the icy runway, you're holding onto the seat in front of you or the armrests, you're white-knuckling it, you're stressed. And when there is a break in that tension, you want to throw up. On the roller coaster, there's a break in the tension. You might want to throw up, but it's probably for other reasons. You laugh. You're laughing out loud. And your cells don't know the difference. They are simply asking you to interpret what this change in biochemistry means.
Interesting. I agree with you when you say that it's a choice. Just like we've talked before about happiness being a choice. You choose the emotional outcome. But when you can relate it back to it being the same response at a physical level for either an excited moment or a fearful moment, you absolutely boil it down to a choice.
Right.
So I feel like I think that's interesting. It reminds me, this is more of a funny story than the first one, but I never went to haunted houses, and I had a lot of friends that would go every year, and I always told them no. So one of my friends that lived out of state at the time used to love to come to Utah and go to the haunted houses because they're better there. So if you are a haunted house person, evidently Utah is the place to go. So I remember she came into town on a business trip, and we hit 3 in one night. Now, remember that I had never been to a haunted house because I did not want to go to them because it looked scary to me. I was afraid of them. It wasn't my idea of doing something fun, but she came into town. I didn't want to let her down. We ended up going. So I walk into the first haunted house. I think it was a haunted forest, actually. We went to the haunted forest, and we start walking through. And I had that moment of realization that all it is props and teenagers making a little extra money on the nights and weekends around Halloween. And there was no ghost there. There was no, forbidden evil lurking in the shadows. It was Tommy from American Fork High School making some extra money. And I remember the first one we went to, I laughed the entire time. And it was because that was my reaction. Yes, it got the adrenaline going, and it was exciting to see what, we were going to do. Some of it was kind of gross, and, like a lot of Halloween stuff usually ends up being. But I laughed the entire time. And after that first one, I was like, yeah, let's go to the second one. This is great. And so for me, it was so funny. So there is a fear of the unknown because we project our perception of what the experience is going to look like. And we will prevent ourselves from participating in that based on a thought.
Right.
So how do you change those thoughts? How do you move away from, I'm not going to date this person because it's not going to go well, or I'm not going to go for my dream job because I'm afraid of failure.
Right. And the answer to that is just as simple as filling the void. You have to fill that vacuum. You have to satisfy the vacuum. Now, bear in mind that you never really know until you get there. This job might suck. You might get fired. The guy you're talking about dating might be a complete loser, complete deadbeat. You don't know until you get there. But you can satisfy this itch that the human psyche has to know what the future is going to hold and to fill that vacuum, to satisfy that vacuum simply by setting an intent of what you want it to be, right? So bear in mind that the reason we go to, say, scary movies, since we're on the subject of haunted houses, we go to scary movies because we can sit in a scary movie in a completely safe environment and we can experience fear. But we can always come out of the fearful situation, right? I can snap back, and even though my autonomic nervous system is responding, my heart rate's increased, my pulse is increased, the blood pressure's up, maybe I'm perspiring a little bit, I'm, grabbing a hold of the handrest, or maybe the person beside me. Hopefully I know that person. And because talk about fear, now there might be some real fear going on. But no, you have to feel, you want to feel that response. You want to feel that response, but you want to be able to step off at any moment. At any moment, I can just pull back, close my eyes, turn my head, say this is just a movie, right? Mm-hmm. Your autonomic nervous system does not know the difference between a movie and real life. Just the way your autonomic nervous system struggles to know the difference between a fantasy and real life. So I can close my eyes, you can, anyone can, close your eyes, think about your outcome, visualize the outcome and the emotions associated with that outcome, and set your intent. By doing that, you fill the void, you satisfy the vacuum, and you alleviate the fear. Now, that's not to say that it won't creep back in. It will. It will because, in fact, your brain knows that you don't actually know the future. You're just telling yourself a story. And so it will go out a little further into the future and come back and say, oh my gosh, there's another void. There's another empty space. There's another vacuum. What do we do? And what you do is you reestablish the intent. That's why we chant mantras in, Eastern religion. That's why we look forward, focus on that thing or that occurrence or objective that we look for, that we want to occur, and we repeat it to ourselves over and over and over again, because we're constantly creeping down the timeline of life, and we're revealing more and more and more of a vacuum, and those holes have got to be filled in order for your subconscious to allow you to move forward devoid of fear.
That makes sense.
If you're not constantly chanting that mantra, if you're not constantly projecting and reprojecting your intent, then you fall victim to the human condition, which is to look for the path of least resistance. And fear is the path of least resistance. It's so much easier to just be afraid of the unknown than it is to come up with a potential solution. And here's the future. And this is me succeeding at the job. This is me getting the promotion or the raise. This is me happily married and whatever it is. Mm-hmm. That takes work. Fear takes no work. All I have to do is remain still, follow the path of absolute least resistance, and my psyche will generate all the fear I can handle.
Well, and I would even venture to say that, 100,000 years ago, fear was something that would allow you to stay alive longer. It was a little more valid than it is today.
Very much so. I mean, it was very necessary, right? Because we have only been at the quote-unquote top of the food chain for the last maybe 10,000 years, Mm-hmm. Of the 200,000 years that we think we've been kicking around the planet, and some will argue it's been much longer, and some will argue it's been much shorter. I don't care. Let's go with the mainstream scientific consensus is a couple of 100,000 years. Whoever's right or wrong doesn't really matter. It's not relevant to this conversation. That's a completely different conversation. But of those 200,000 years, you got to understand it's only been about 30,000 years ago that we realized that the little seeds that grow at the top of stalks, which we have since developed agriculturally and come to call wheat, those little seeds at the top of the cute little stalks were consumable. As a matter of fact, we can grind them into a powder, and we can add water and leave them out, water and sugar, and leave them out in the sun, or water and any kind of sweetening agent. And we create bread, and bread is the staff of life, or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So we discovered the little seeds at the top of these stalks were in fact consumable. Not only that, but we could dig up these stalks from the edge of the forest and bring them back to the hut next to the river. And that's what we began to do. We stopped being hunters and gatherers and slowly became an agrarian-based economy. So we're coming outside of the huts in the morning. Here are our lovely seeds in the fields next to the huts. We harvest them, we cook them, we grind them, we cook them, we eat them, whatever it is, okay? Now, a very interesting thing happened, just to a side note of this, and so I'll bore you with some of the archaeological anthropology for a minute. Because we gathered together and began to clump together. See, before we were out, spread out. We were very thin. Hunting parties of a half a dozen people are out looking. Hunting parties of a half a dozen people are going a different direction. They're gathering. Somebody's trying to bring home meat or protein. Somebody's trying to bring home starches and seeds, nuts, berries, whatever we can find growing, greens, whatever we can find growing, right? And so we were pretty thinly spread along the landscape. And then about 30,000 years ago, when we decided, hey, we can grow stuff right outside the hut, and we don't have to travel across the countryside to be able to consume it. So we started to do that. When we started to do that, what happens when you hang out in a group of people together for a few weeks and you eat? So you eat your food, and you feel better, you feel energized, and so you do a few things, you get a little exercise. What happens eventually?
Like as far as the relationship with the people?
No, biologically.
I don't know.
Sure you do. You do it every day, hopefully, if you're healthy. Come on, we're all grown up.
Bathroom?
You defecate. Exactly, you defecate. Everybody, if it goes in one end and it's not 100% consumed by your biochemistry, then there's something left over, and that's going to come out the other end, okay?
Okay.
So here's what we began to do is we started to clump together into groups of hundreds, and even, up to 1,000 people would be in these tribes and clans raising the grains and harvesting them, and that's what we're living off of. And so we began to poop all over the place. Now, when we began to poop piles up, it starts to stink. Some of it serves as fertilizer for the additional wheat crop or whatever we're growing. But invariably, in order to get the poop away from us, we got it into the water supply, both the groundwater as well as the rivers or streams or whatever we were servicing ourselves with water by, whatever methodology that was. Well, that begins to taint the water.
Right.
The water starts to become bad. This bacteria starts to thrive in the water. We go and bathe and drink the water that is now tainted, and we begin to die off. And there was a massive die-off because this was happening as we moved from hunter-gatherer to agrarian society all over the planet, or at least where mankind seemed to be. But every little outcropping of mankind was dying off in droves. Here's the really interesting story, and there are people out there who won't like this story. Do you know what saved us?
Yes.
Probably not. So I'll just tell you.
Okay.
Do you know what saved us?
Yeah, beer saved us.
That is absolutely correct. We found that the water that had wheat and wheat germ and wheat hulls left in the water would begin to change and bubble and smell differently. Somebody got the guts to drink some of that, and that water did not make us sick. So where the other water was killing people off, this water, no problem. And yeah, it basically is what we call Hefeweizen today, right?
And the first fraternity was born.
Next thing you know, there's keggers and beer bongs, wet t-shirt parties. That's where the wet t-shirt party came from. That's where the t-shirt came from. That's why we invented t-shirts, because they were clingy. All right, it's going super south. Let's get back on track here for a minute. As it relates back to fear, though, like, and me, I'm just a geek, right? I'm like such a nerd for that kind of thing. And so I enjoy it. But in terms of us, back in the day, over 20 or 30,000 years ago, when we're not at the top of the food chain, when we are hunting the woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed tiger is hunting us. And so we had to be able to recognize problems. We had to be able to hear the broken twig. We had to smell the errant smell, hear the sound. We had to be immediately startled. By being startled and always on edge, we're always looking up for that thing that might be coming out of the bushes. That's why we see faces in things, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's why we look at the pattern on the wall in the drywall, right? Mm-hmm. And you look at it, and you kind of look at it again and say, oh my gosh, it looks exactly like a face peeking out from behind a rock or whatever. It's because we have essentially conditioned ourselves, or been conditioned by the hand of God maybe, to recognize facial patterns. We recognize facial patterns very, very quickly, because that about 1 out of 100 times that was a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes. And we had to know, we had to see it before we got too close to the bushes.
Right.
And so fear kept us alive for a very long time. Still does. One would argue it still does to this day, to a very large degree.
It does. It absolutely does in some instances. But where it's detrimental to your life is where you allow for fear to take over to prevent action. And like you said, it's the path of least resistance. It absolutely is easy to be afraid as opposed to be brave. And the great stories in history are not about the people that were afraid. They were about the people that were brave. And you have to be brave in your own life. And I will tell you another thing. It is very important to stay in a positive space. And the reason I say that is you have to be with people that uplift you and allow for the positivity and allow for the art of intention. Let's call it the art of intention. Setting intentions, and it truly is an art. It allows you to create a positive flow in your life, whether that be energy or thought or just the emotion that goes along with concentrating on the positive. Nobody even likes to be around that person that's negative all the time.
Right.
And you have to create that. Now, I will tell you, I'm going to wrap this whole fear of flying story into a nice little pretty bow. A couple of years ago, I took a vacation. It was a big family trip. So I have my mom, my dad, my stepdad, my brother, and his daughter, and I are on a plane. She's 5 years old. So I have my brother and his daughter and I are sitting in the row of 3, and my mom and dad are over on the other side of the aisle. This was the first flight that Ainsley had ever been on. But we were going back to the little girl, 5-year-old girl. She had never flown before. And this was our first flight. And we were going back to North and South Carolina for about 3 weeks. And so we were leaving Salt Lake City and flying to Raleigh. We boarded the flight, and Ainsley was fine. She was sitting in between my brother and I, and she has her coloring book or crayons or whatever we had her doing. We went to take off, and as we exceeded down the runway, I look at her and she starts to shake. She's terrified. We get up into the air. Now, remember that, flying still isn't my favorite thing, although the fear isn't as profound as it used to be. In that moment, I chose to help stop that cycle and not pass that fear on, because we absolutely can do that. So I look at her, she's shaking, and I grab her hand and I start rubbing her hand. And I said, baby girl, don't be afraid. I said, people do this all day, every day. Everybody flies. I said, we're going to go and we're going to have a good time. And I will tell you that we took off over Salt Lake in the worst turbulence that I have ever had on any flight that I've ever taken. But because I reaffirmed to her that this was normal, this was an absolutely normal occurrence and people did this every day and it's safe, she immediately calmed down and in that moment was able to develop the belief that everybody flies all the time when in reality that's true. And so she will never be afraid of flying. I remember coming back after the 3 weeks, we left Raleigh. She was talking the entire flight. She was talking the entire flight. Everything was fine. There was no fear for her because all of a sudden the unknown became the known and there was somebody there guiding her through that. So it's very important that you surround yourself with people that don't feed into your fears, but actually will help you overcome them as well. And so it was a great learning experience for me because I thought, well, regardless of how turbulent this flight is and how much I really, I'm never going to get my pilot's license. I mean, I'm just going to throw that out there. But I'm not going to let it stand in the way of living my life. I love to travel. I love to go all over and see new things. But I could not allow that fear to be passed on to her. And in that moment, I mean, it took 5 seconds because she's young. She was 5 years old. She was impressionable. And so it took 5 seconds to steer her in the right direction. And that's a fear that she will never have.
Right. And you not only did you steer her in the right direction, but you chose to certainly not exhibit the fear. Whether you felt it or not is between you and you. But you chose to dampen it down. You chose to temper the fear just with your own belief, will, intent. And you had the motivation, you had the reasoning of being able to help her. But still, you made a choice. You shaved 20% of the fear off so that you were not compelled to reveal it. You didn't shake, right? And so if you can shave 20% off, why can't you shave 40, 60, 80, 100?
Exactly. You can. You can. You just have to put the energy into the belief that it's possible and anything is possible. Every time I get up to do some kind of training or talk in front of a large group of people, right before I get in front of them, whether it's on a stage or just at the front of a gigantic conference room or it's a small training room with, 20, 25 people, there's always that moment of anticipation where your blood starts to pump and your heart starts to beat faster and you get this excitement. And a lot of people will interpret that as fear. But I will tell you that I've never had a higher high than when you get up and you're doing a presentation and you're getting people involved and they're responding to you and the crowd is great and, everybody's engaged and you sit down and you're like, I did that. So if you can conquer the fear and process it as the excitement and the anticipation of what's coming next, you can get through any obstacle.
Absolutely. Well, and that's the other thing in the human psychological condition is we tend to look at things as entire things or entire situations. We don't usually decode things. Okay, so let me explain. You've probably seen one of these little things on Facebook where there is a little paragraph that's written with just a scant few letters representing each individual word, right? And the catch line is like, if you can read this, then you're super intelligent or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. I've seen those, yeah.
You've seen something like that, yeah. So you're reading this paragraph, but when you look at it, it's very obvious what the writer of said paragraph meant. Even though most of the letters are not there, a lot of the letters are misplaced, mixed up. Sometimes there are numbers in for letters, but you can still read the paragraph. And what that is the human condition where we tend to look at things in groups. We tend to look at things as a whole and not as a code, right? Mm-hmm. We don't break it down to letter by letter by letter and sound it out the way we do in kindergarten. We do it in kindergarten, we do it in first grade, but then about third grade, man, you just read. You just look at it. Those 16 letters represent a word, and your brain immediately registers that word. Now, that's good. That's good for us. It helps us to move very quickly through life and read quickly and understand. But it's not necessarily that good for us when we're looking at our future and our concerns about what otherwise is an empty future, right? Mm-hmm. We don't know what's really going to happen. I mean, you want to be afraid of airplanes? An airplane could fall out of the sky and land through your house today, right? It's not very likely, but then the airplane crashing is also not very likely. It's not worth concerning yourself with. And yet we do, in fact, concern ourselves with it because we tend to look at life as the whole word and not letter by letter by letter. And so we don't break things down into the step by step by step by step. We just immediately look at the challenge of the new job or the challenge of, I want to start my business, right? And we don't just break it down to line by line by line. We look at the whole book and say, I will never be able to read this. I will never get through this book. It's just immense. When in fact, all you really got to do is just get through the first paragraph on the first page today.
Right. Yeah.
Then tomorrow is a brand new beginning. But we don't do that. We look at it as this giant whole. We have to eat the elephant in one massive bite all at once. But that's just not the way life works. And as long as you're allowing yourself to believe that's the way life works, that will always lead to fear and intimidation. Because the fact of the matter is you can't eat the elephant in one bite. You may not. You will not do it. It is physiologically impossible. But one bite at a time, come see me in a year. I'm having elephant jerky all year long, baby. This thing will be white and bleached bones between me and my kids. You've seen my kids eat, right? This poor creature, and I've got nothing against elephants, right? I'm just, an elephant's an example. But yeah, whatever the creature, whatever the task, if I'm given adequate time, I can absolutely consume it, and so can you, and so can everybody alive. We just need time to break it down to step by step, line by line. And to avoid that human nature to clump everything into one great, big, complete story. It's not. It's one letter at a time, and then one word in one sentence, one paragraph, one page, and then it's one book. And then it's a volume of books if you will just keep moving forward.
Well, and you have to. You have to be able to balance the big picture and not stop. You know, there's a song that I listen to quite often, but it talks about how if you're going through hell, you have to keep on going. And you'll get to the other side. And that's so true. It's okay to acknowledge the emotion. In that moment where you're feeling fear, it's okay to acknowledge it, but you immediately have to start working through whatever the response is to that fear for you. And so is that focusing on the positive? Absolutely is focusing on the positive. It is absolutely breaking it down. That makes so much sense. And you have to live in the moment and just be okay with where you are. And I don't think you should overanalyze it. I think you should acknowledge it and then figure out the steps to go through it. And you don't stop. It's okay to reevaluate and understand that you're going to have moments of fear. It is a physiological response to a belief that you're experiencing. And so changing that belief takes time and it takes effort, but it also takes the consistency. And it'll happen. You have to have faith in that.
Right. And that's I think probably the biggest struggle for most of the people that I've encountered, run into, is just being able to break it down, take it one step at a time, and realize eventually I get to where this road leads. And so all I have to know is not what's down the road, but am I on the right road? Because if I'm on the right road, the road that I know I want to be on, then the rest of it is just step by step by step. I'm going to take countless steps. I can't even begin to keep up with it. But I'm just never going to stop moving forward. But you got to have faith that that road leads to where you want to be. You know, that's the old adage. I can't remember who said it, but they said there's nothing worse than climbing the ladder, and then 3/4 of the way up the ladder, realize it's leaning against the wrong building, right? Mm-hmm. This is not where I want to be. I didn't sign up for this.
I know. And that's when you turn it
right?
around. Yeah, you absolutely turn it around and make it something you would sign up for.
Yeah. You do. Or, worst case scenario, you got to go down the ladder again. I mean, you got to jump. And that sucks. But sometimes that's just life. Sometimes that's just the way it is. I think the better strategy is certainly in terms of alleviating fear. The better strategy is to just be engaged in the behavior you're in. Enjoy the behavior of whatever your ladder climbing is, right? Because if my goal, so if my goal is to harvest pearls from the Indian Ocean, and my favorite behavior in the world is swimming underwater, then I'm on the right path.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Because worst case, I eat the oyster. Best case, I have a big string of pearls. I retire wealthy. But man, nobody's going to regret swimming in the ocean and collecting oysters their whole life if they don't get the pearls they were after. And so that's the real key. You've got to enjoy the behavior because success is hard. It always comes. It always comes eventually. You have to work for it and make it happen. But the first thing you need to do is make sure you're doing what you were cut out to do.
I agree. I think that's a very important point. You don't want to be on the wrong path and trying to get through fear to get to an ultimate outcome that you truly don't want or that won't make you happy.
Right.
And that's a whole nother podcast.
It probably is, but it's worth touching on. We've actually talked about similar things in the past wherein life comes at you and it's either by design or by default. If you're not designing, you're going to get whatever the world, the universe, God Almighty throws your way. If you don't seek and set an intent, if you don't design, then you're going to get whatever comes your way by virtue of whatever the default is. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Quite often, that default is defined by the group around you. It's the old adage, show me your friends and I'll show you your future.
Oh, I like that.
There's a lot of truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
Show me your friends and I'll show you your future. So if you are hanging out with people who believe like you believe, or at least want to believe like you believe, and those beliefs are moving you toward achieving your goals, moving you toward happiness, then you're going to attain that happiness. If you're sitting around complaining about how unfair life is, you're going to receive an unfair life. You're going to find what you look for. And the friends are very, very, very important. Your peer group is incredibly important.
I agree with that because we've all had friends that are always in such a negative space that you start to avoid them because it zaps your energy. It takes the energy from you. And believe me, I'm that person that is trying to sit down and say, no, it's okay. I'm a forever optimist. It takes a lot for me to look at the glass as half empty. But when you expose yourself to people that live in the space of my glass is just empty or half empty or whatever, you start to adopt the same belief.
You do.
And it absolutely will hold you back.
Well, you do. Like I had the same conversation last night, oddly enough. I was outside kicking it by the fire, talking to my son, who the world calls Josh and I call him Gator. And that's, people think it's like deep South stuff. It's really not. I call that kid Gator because from the time he was old enough to talk, he would give me directions on the freeway or on the highway or in town. He could he could remember which road was the left, and he could remember he couldn't read signs when he could remember road markers in his brain. And he would say, if we turn this way over here and then we go there and then we turn that way, then we're going to be home. And I would look and say, man, you're just my little navigator, aren't you? Well, navigator, I called him navigator forever. And then slowly navigator just whittled down to gator. And so now 9 out of 10 people who I meet who know that I'm from the South assume I'm from Louisiana, right? Because I have a boy named Gator. Gator, bring your daddy a beer, Gator. What you doing now? Right? But it's not that way, right? That's just we're not from Louisiana. We're not. There's no Cajun blood going here. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but hey, I like jambalaya, but I'm not from Louisiana, I'm sorry to say. Nonetheless, I'm talking with him And we are talking about life in general. We are talking a little bit about the, kind of the border war situation going on between the United States and Mexico, and build a wall or don't build a wall, and all of the, political mumbo jumbo. And, I've read both sides of that argument in detail. Both of them make absolutely brilliant, valid points. And I have my own opinion, but I'm not going to share it because this is not that podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I said to him is had to do with an anthropological study that I had read, who's looked at society at large on the planet, and indicated that if you live in Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the common complaint is, all the poor Mexicans, they want to come to America and have a chance and pursue the American dream, and, just want to come over here and work and be with their families and all that stuff. And then that's great. That sounds fantastic, right?
Yes.
But if you are living in Mexico, you are not in the top 1%. You're not a 1%er, but you are in the top 19% of all humans on the planet in terms of wealth and in terms of lifestyle. There are 81% of the people on this planet who are lower on that socioeconomic food chain, right?
Interesting. Uh-huh.
There are people living on, $1 a day, 50 cents a day, in terms of, if you converted all of their life and lifestyle into American money, right? It would be similar to you trying to eke out a living on $1 a day, right? Well, that's not happening in Mexico. That's not. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of people in West Africa who would kill or die to just be dropped right in the middle of Mexico and go to work, right? And carve out their life. The difference is they don't really know that, right? I mean, imagine for a moment that there was this breakaway civilization, super species of human that, 100 years ago met some aliens, and the aliens said, let me show you how things really work. And there are interdimensional time portals, and you can live in this amazing place and still go, back to Earth whenever you want to, or, live in a separate planet that the others can't really see. And, it's just awesome. It's fantastic. And the quality of life is just beyond what you can even imagine. Okay. So if that were true, would you inherently now feel sorry for yourself because you're not a part of that? No, because you don't know it even exists, right? It all comes down to what we know and what we believe, and then the expectations we ascribe to those beliefs. And so I think that's the biggest problem, is that people just have a shift in paradigm, a shift in belief. You learn something. You find out something new. Some new bit of information comes into play, and then you reset your expectations based on the new bit of information.
That makes sense. And you can do that in a positive light too.
Right. Because you can do that on an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
A new bit of information shows up and you say, you know what? I have decided not to be afraid. Certainly not as afraid. You can do that with your business, with your marital relationship, with your friends, with anything. You can find the new bit of information. The new bit of information affects your psyche. Your autonomic nervous system kicks in. The hypothalamus, the pituitary, the adrenal glands, all of these glandular activity starts to pump hormones into your body. And then the cells react as they are automatically prescribed to react by virtue of whatever the chemical is. And then the cells look up at the brain and says, why do we feel this way? Okay, I'm very relaxed. I'm very happy. I'm very contented. Why do I feel this way? I'm on a beach in Tahiti. That's what it is. You tell yourself the story, right? You could just as easily say, like, I'm edgy. I'm on edge. I'm terrified. I'm marooned on one of the outer islands of Tahiti, and my ship is sunk, right? I'm likely going to starve to death. But not right now, you're not.
Right.
Right now, there's fruit falling off the trees. Right now, you're still just on a beach in the South Pacific. It's warm. It's beautiful. Life is fantastic. Your cells look to your psyche and say, what's the story? Give me the backstory so I can understand why we are feeling this way based on the chemistry that you are producing.
Well, and I'm going to throw a thought out there, and this is something that I have thought a lot about. The fear that you feel in the moment that you're in will not change the outcome of most situations.
The overwhelming majority of the time, that is correct.
Yeah. The only outcome that it will change is if it prevents you from taking action on something that will give you something better than what you have today. So, well, I'm afraid we're running out of time. See what I did there?
I see what you did there. Wait a minute. That was kind of clever. I see what y'all are doing. I see what you did there. All right, very good. As always, thanks for showing up and sharing with us. Feel free to shoot us any questions you might have or any insights you might be willing to share as you listen to this. We always love getting a little bit of feedback. And I guess until then, it's time for the tagline. Dream your life.
And live your dreams.
Okay, till next time.
Bye-bye.